All right, welcome back to the project. Right now we are entering phase 3, which is where you start taking a more active role in gathering information. This, of course, is the interview phase of the project, where you focus on finding people to talk to, planning an interview with them, and then going out, conducting interviews to get data so you can answer your research question. This video is designed to show you how you can plan a successful interview to get the data that you need. But first, let's just review and see where we are in this process. You already have your research question. This is the thing that you're trying to find out with your project. In order to find that out, you're going to need some data. You're going to need some information that you can use to give us an answer to this research question. The primary source of that data is your interview. So to get that data, you need to develop some interview questions that you can ask people so they will tell you things that you can then use to answer your own research question. It's important to point out here that the research question and the interview question are completely separate. You do not ask your interviewee your research question. Instead, you use interview questions to give you data that you take for yourself to answer the research question. Right now, you're getting ready to start making a plan for your interview. In general, interviewing isn't really always as simple as just asking someone a question to get the information that you need. As a result, when you're preparing for your interview, you should not frame your plan as a list of questions, but instead a conversation you want to have with somebody. Doing this allows for a more comfortable and a longer interview session, which is more likely to produce deeper and richer data that you can include in your project video. So if you're not starting with questions, what do you start with? Well, step 1 is choosing 3 to 4 topics that you plan on discussing with your interviewee. This is something that you can share with them beforehand if you would like. You're welcome to start with just a topic of getting to know the person to help make them feel more comfortable talking to you and to get that background information that you can use when you're making your video. In order to figure out what topics you want to cover, you think about what kinds of data you will need to answer your research question. So what kind of data are you looking to get from your interviews? Well, we've talked about this a little bit in class, but in general, you're looking for people's experiences. What do they actually do? What have they done? You want to collect data about the actual experience and actions and behaviors of people as they interact with online video platforms, however related to your project. That's a primary source of data that we can get from people. We also value their perspectives. Your interviewees may have some special view of things because of their role, their beliefs, and their actions. You want to get how they see things from the vantage point that they sit in, which is their perspective. They can provide insight as a creator, as a viewer, as a user, as somebody who has experiences that informs how they see things, and you want to try to capture that. What we're not looking for so much are people's opinions. That we don't necessarily care what people believe or what they think about things. Instead, we want to focus on what they actually do and how they see things from wherever it is that they sit in relation to the topic of your project. Obviously, what this data is that leads to the topics of your conversation really depends on your project. So to kind of help you see how this can work, I'll take my sample project as an example. As a reminder, here is my research question, but I actually changed it a little bit and I want to share with you the revision. This is very normal and will happen, right? Research questions continue to modify even as you're working on the project. This new research question focuses more on how the trend of podcasts moving to short video has altered podcaster, listener, or viewer's relationship to podcast and the podcasters. So I really wanted to emphasize the connection between listener and this change in video. From that research question, I have devised 3 simple topics that I want to cover in my interviewee. The first one is just some background about the person and their history listening to podcasts. The second one is their relationship with the podcast and the podcasters that they listen to or watch. Finally, I want to talk to them about their experience using podcasts on video platforms, either long or short. So we have now started with some topics that we want to cover in the discussion. The next step is for each of those 3 topics, you want to start with an open-ended tell me question to get the interviewee talking to you about what it is that you want to discuss. Then in the interview plan, you can list more specific follow-up questions that include things that you want to know and topics you want to cover in that part of the discussion. You start with a tell me question, and then after they've given you your opening, you can either go in a direction that they provide for you, or you can turn to the follow-up questions in that section that you want to ask. Let's see an example. Let's start with my first topic, their background, their history of podcast. Start with an open-ended question. You can tell them a little bit about what this section of the discussion is about, or your project in general, and then you give a tell me or a really invitation for them to share with you. For example, my project is about comedy podcasts. Can you tell me about comedy podcasts that you like? Starting with this open-ended question invites them to share whatever they feel is appropriate and to take control of the conversation. This empowers them to give you better information. The rest of the section of the interview consists of two parts. One, planned follow-up questions. Here I brainstormed a bunch that I could talk about in this part of this. The goal is to just have lots of things that you can talk about in this part of the discussion that can give you data that you can use in your project. The more you have, the better you will be at finding information that could be useful. You may or may not use all of these in the discussion based off what people say in the interview, but you want to plan as many questions as you can that gather data, in this case about how they got interested in podcasts, what kind of behaviors do they do with the podcast, where do they find them, what are their motivations to listening for podcasts, why do they feel that's important, what makes a good podcast. Anything that you can think about that would help them think more and be comfortable talking to you about what they listen to and how and why. The rest of this section involves you listening to the responses that they give to your questions and then asking follow-ups to whatever it is that they said. A lot of the questions that are in your interview, you can't plan because you don't know how they're going to respond. So the third thing, besides the open-ended first one, plan follow-ups, the third thing is listening to what they say and asking questions, responding to whatever it is that they share with you. In the end, what you will have is a plan that has 3 to 4 different topics that you want to cover in the interview. Each one of these topics will start with an open-ended invitation for the interviewee to share with you their thoughts or beliefs or perspectives related to the topic that you're sharing. Tell me questions, can you describe for me, those kind of invitation, open-ended questions. And then you will plan lots of different follow-up questions that are things that you think are important that you want to cover in this part of the interview. You plan many, many follow-ups. You may or may not use all of them, but you have questions that are designed to give you data that you may be able to use in your project. And then finally, in the interview itself, you have to always be listening and be ready to ask impromptu questions based off whatever it is they're saying. You need to provide space in the interview plan to be listening to and responding to whatever it is they say, to get more information, to ask for elaboration, to get examples of these things, to get more data from them based off of whatever they're saying. On Brightspace, in the project tab of our page, at the bottom here you will find some interviewing tips that really give you a lot of skills, I think, that are important. But a lot of them are related to probing, right? As it says at the very top, the most important question is probably not on your question sheet. So this gives you examples about how you can get more information out of the interviewee once you've started the interview. There's also lots of really good tips in here, and you should read this and understand this as you're making your interview plan and as you're getting ready to do the interview. Of course, you will need to do this, the open-ended question, all of the planned follow-ups, and then leaving space to ask questions in the interview for each of the 3 or 4 sections that you have on your plan. Each of these sections will contain all of these different parts, and they'll give you lots to talk about and lots of directions for your interviews when you go out and interview the people that you're going to talk to. So there you have it. That is an overview of what your interview plan should look like and an example from my own project, as well as some resources on Brightspace that can help you as you plan and as you interview later. Soon I will share with you more details about how you will submit your interview plan, but it's really important to keep these characteristics in mind as you prepare for getting good data from the interviews that you're going to do in your project. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing your interview plans. Good luck.